miracle working, promise keeping, prayer answering God, whose power we now lean into to move our nation from anger and agony to action and advocacy until all lives truly matter as they do to you. In the name that is above all names, we pray this prayer. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara. We now go to Congresswoman Karen Bass, Chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and the lead House author of the Justice and Policing Act. Ms. Bass?
Well, thank you. And I just want to thank everyone on the call today. I want to thank you for the work that you have done over all of these years. The struggle continues, it never ends. And what we're seeing on the streets of our country is the next generation that's going to carry the baton on. But what we hope is that the Justice in Policing Act will give tools to our communities so that we can hold police officers accountable. Right now, you can't sue, you can't prosecute, you can't fire. And so we want communities to be able to have the tools so that an officer can't just say, well, I was in fear of my life, and that's why I had to kill someone. Well, if you look at Tamir Rice, 12 years old, he would have graduated high school this summer. That was an officer that was fired from another jurisdiction who lied on his application, was able to be hired. Well, we think there needs to be a national registry of police officers that have had trouble. I want to mention one other section because my colleagues here from the Senate can talk more in depth about the bill, but one piece that I think doesn't get talked about very much, and that is grants to communities so that communities can come up with innovative solutions. Communities can begin to say, let's re-examine policing in our community. We know we have problems, well, let's figure out how to address the root causes of the problems so that then we do not need as many police officers. So I just want to thank you for your support. We have to get this across the finish line. We're on a short timeline. We're going to have a hearing about the bill on Wednesday. Next week, we'll have a vote in committee. And then the week after that, we'll have a vote on the floor. I'm proud to say that we have over 150 co-sponsors in the House, and the bill was just released today. Every member of the Congressional Black Caucus is on the bill, and many pieces of the bill represent legacy pieces of legislation that members of the Congressional Black Caucus have worked on for many, many years. So thank you very much for your leadership and your activism and your assistance in helping us get this over the finish line.
And Congresswoman Bass, Chair Bass, we want to thank you for your leadership, which has been outstanding. It's been dogged, it's been persistent, and you've helped us get to this point very quickly. So thank you very much. To Senator Cory Booker, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and one of the lead authors of the Justice and Policing Act in the United States Senate. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. I want to just thank Karen Bass. Kamala and I are actually two of the members of the 55-member Congressional Black Caucus, and she is our leader. She has done an extraordinary job working with her Senate wing as well as her House wing to include the thoughts and ideas of so many of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, many of whom have been working on these issues long before I got to Congress. So I'm grateful for her leadership, for Judiciary Chair Nadler, who was a partner with her on the House side. And on our side, Senator Harris, who's been an extraordinary partner in us and our work, we have now, less than 24 hours of the announcement of this bill, already 2/3 of the Democratic Senate caucus on board, which is extraordinary so far. So this bill is narrow but vast. And what I mean by that is it's narrow in the sense that it is focusing on justice in policing. And I'll talk about some other issues in a second. Justice in policing, it really goes to that point that Martin Luther King made, is I can't pass legislation to make you love me, but I can pass legislation to stop you from lynching me. We can't pass legislation to change the heart, but we can pass legislation to restrain the heartless. And that's what this bill is about. And it has a number of sort of corners to it. One is this idea that there are certain practices that should be banned in the United States: racial and religious profiling, chokeholds, no-knock warrants that we saw that got Breonna Taylor killed. And so there's a whole bucket of things that are all about practices that should be nationally banned or insisted upon, like implicit racial bias training and work. Another bucket of this is this idea that Kamala knows so much about as a former prosecutor, is why is it that it is so hard to hold accountable through federal laws police officers who break community standards, violate the law, and violate civil rights? And so this changes a number of things, including the qualified immunity idea that has sprung up from the courts that protects police officers from civil penalties. 1983 civil rights penalties, as many of you know them, and that changes that qualified immunity. And for federal criminal prosecution, it adjusts a standard established in Section 242, which says that the police officer has to have willfully killed someone, violated their rights. That willful standard is hard because it's what they call in law mens rea. How do you get into the mindset to know something was willful or not? It lowers that standard to reckless disregard. And so this idea that we will now have practices that are banned, that will protect lives, police officers that can be held accountable. And another pillar of this bill, the final one I'll mention, is this idea of utter, complete transparency. Remember, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And to allow now local activists in the community, to state leaders, to federal leaders, to now have transparency into police, to know their pattern and practices, to know their misconduct, their use of force. All of these things are what we're creating: national databases, transparency, accessible to the public as well as to authority figures. So that's a general contours of this legislation. What it does not do, what we still have work to do, is the fact that we are a nation that has over-criminalized its people. We criminalize addiction, we criminalize mental health, people struggling with mental health, we criminalize the poor. We have a lot of work to do in those areas so that we don't need so many police and courts and prisons and jails. But this is a narrowly tailored bill to deal with police injustices and to create transparency and accountability. Thank you very much.
I can't hear.
You're muted, brother Mark.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you, Senator Booker. We appreciate your leadership and your continued passion. Senator Kamala Harris, a member of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee from the great state of California, is another lead Senate co-author of the Justice and Policing Act. Senator?
Thank you, Mark, and to everybody and all the leaders. And as my brother Corey said, there are lots of folks on this call who have been fighting this fight long before we got to the United States Senate. And so we obviously stand on your shoulders and the shoulders of those who came before. So Corey outlined a lot of it, and I'll say this: this bill is really narrowly tailored to address accountability by police and to make sure there are consequences. Because for far too long, we know that there has not been accountability and consequence for bad policing. So it does do the work of saying that we need to change the national standard. We can look at DAs around the country, and many of them the first Black elected prosecutor in their state, much less in their county, who have tried to bring these cases, have not been able to meet the standard because it's practically insurmountable. Using layman's language, a lot of the legal standard for showing that a police officer used excessive force is to ask, was that use of force reasonable? Well, as we know, you can find reason for just about anything. So what we want to do is change the question so that it is a more fair and relevant question, which is to ask, was it necessary? And in that way, change the national standard on use of force and how we prove use of force. One of the other things that we want to do is pattern and practice investigations. I mentioned to a few of the folks on the call. So, I did those pattern and practice investigations when I was Attorney General of investigating law enforcement for patterns and practice of abuse and discrimination. And what we're doing on a federal level is saying that we want to restart those, a lot of which were done in a very vigorous way under Eric Holder. and have now been shut down by Bill Barr and before him, Jeff Sessions. But in addition to restarting it, we want to have more tools available. And so one of the specific things is we are now going to give the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice subpoena power. So they don't just have to ask the police department to produce records or produce evidence. They will have the power to make them do it through a subpoena, which obviously is issued through a court of law. We want to do independent investigations. Again, I say as a former prosecutor, no matter how well-intentioned a DA's office is and a prosecutor may be, the reality is that there is just an appearance of conflict, if not an actual conflict, when you have the state's attorney's office or the DA's office investigating a police officer from the police department they work with every day. It's just a fact. So we need to have independent investigations and make that the law of the land. On the point that Corey was making about data collection and transparency and sunlight as a disinfectant. When I was running the California Department of Justice, we started the first in the nation for a Department of Justice open data system where we exposed data around deaths in custody and around arrest rates based on race and demographic information. This is so important for the activists, for the advocates, for the academicians, to be able to have that data so that we're not trying to force change at the state and local level just based on anecdote or compelling stories, but actually based on the data. So this is a very important aspect of this bill. All of that being said, we also hear what's happening in the streets. And so to that, I want to say this. This bill does not address the broader issue of what we need to do to create safe and healthy communities. It does not. It does not address what we need to do, which is to reckon with the fact that in many cities, the city budget, over 1/3 of that city budget goes to the police departments. It does not address the fact that in suburbs, middle class, upper middle class suburbs, they don't have police presence like you see in other communities, but what they do have are well-funded schools. What they do have are families that have jobs and home ownership. What they do have are people who have the ability to afford medical care and public health care when they need it. And so we have to also, as we are talking about this bill, I think really acknowledge what we have not done with this bill, but what needs to be done, which is to reimagine public safety in America, understanding that there has been a confusion, which is to suggest that the way you create safe communities is to put more cops on the street. No, and we all know that. The way you create safe communities is you also invest in healthy communities, which is about putting those budgets into the public schools so that 2/3 of our public school teachers don't have to come out of their own pocket to pay for school supplies. You do it in terms of having small businesses, giving them access to capital. You do that in terms of creating jobs. You do that, and you all know, everybody here knows what I'm talking about. So in talking about our bill, I think it is important that we hear the folks and, the movements that are starting, and like all movements, there are many things that people are righteously marching and shouting for. But this bill will be, I believe, historic in what it will create for the first time in terms of requiring accountability and creating consequence for bad behavior and for misconduct by law enforcement. And I want to again thank Karen Bass and all of our fellow members of the CBC for the work that they've done. Corey and I were on the phone all day yesterday and for the last few days with our fellow Democrats in the Senate. And when you see the list, I think you'll be happy to see that there's a diversity within the spectrum of Democrats in the Senate who have signed on. So that gives us some hope about what we might be able to accomplish, at least on the Senate side of this. So thank you, Mark, and everybody.
Thank you, Senator Harris, for those remarks, Senator Booker, for those remarks. And I want to note that since Reconstruction, there have only been 6 African Americans to serve in the United States Senate. And it makes a great difference that on this bill, we have two lead Senate sponsors in Senators Booker and Harris. And I appreciate Senator Booker's explanation of the components of this legislation, and Senator Harris's emphasis that this justice and policing bill is a step forward, but does not comprehensively address all of the issues of justice and structural racism that are being elevated by the protests in the streets, not only across America, but throughout this world. And I would say that we feel, as civil rights leaders, that the wind beneath the wings of this legislation and between our work now are the passions of the people who are in the streets, the passions of the people from all walks of life and backgrounds, the voices of urgency, the voices of insistence, the voices of all ages in streets across America who are saying enough is enough, and it's time to address the issues of racial inequities in American life now. So thank you very much. We're going to move now to remarks from members of the National Black Leadership in America. And first, I want to give regrets on behalf of Reverend Al Sharpton, our friend and brother who is on his way to Houston, Texas to participate in the homegoing services for Mr. Floyd. We want to thank Reverend Sharpton for his powerful eulogy last Thursday in Minneapolis, as well as for his leadership and collaboration with all of us on this legislation. So with that, we're going to go to Kristen Clark, the President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Kristen?
Good afternoon. Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. An honor to be here. And I want to start off by thanking Chairwoman Bass and Senators Harris and Booker for always being a guiding light and a moral compass for us on issues of paramount importance for African Americans across our country. Thank you. This bill is long overdue and is directly responsive to the pressing demands and concerns of those who are marching and protesting in the streets right now. We are a nation at a crossroads, and what we do right now will literally shape the future of our nation. Police violence and racial violence are twin evils that have long torn at the fabric of our country. And I want to thank Congress for moving with all deliberate speed to answer grieving families, for responding to hundreds of thousands of people across the country who are pleading for reform right now. I want to focus on the accountability provisions of this bill, because to truly turn the corner on this crisis, we need officials to be held accountable when they use excessive force or deadly force without basis. We have too many officers in our country who kill with impunity. And the reality is that there have been very few prosecutions, leaving communities without a sense of justice. This bill helps to make clear that officers are not above the law. By ending qualified immunity and fixing 18 U.S.C. 242, the core federal statute used to prosecute and hold officers accountable, we open up a pathway to ensuring justice for communities across our country. By incentivizing state attorney general offices to do their part and to pursue these cases, we may begin to see change. We know that this bill alone will not address the full range of the crisis. We need to change the culture of policing. We need to empower communities that are seeking to have a role in redefining and reshaping how policing plays out in their communities. We need prosecutors who will do their job and hold officers accountable at the end of the day. And we need voters who will exercise and wield the power of their voice at the ballot box in November if we're going to turn the corner in this crisis. But today is no doubt a momentous and historic day. The Justice in Policing Act is long overdue and will help to move our nation forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen, for those remarks. Now we'll go to Tommy Dortch, Chairman of the Board of 100 Black Men of America. Thank you, Kristen. Tommy.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to join all of my fellow soldiers out here trying to make a difference. I want to say, too, that I commend the Congressional Black Caucus and our congressional leadership for what you've done. Of course, Chairwoman Bass and Senator Harris, we appreciate you joining us before our conference. And I have 18 members of the CBC that are members of the 100 Black Men of America. But what I want to say is basically we're prepared to be supportive. Yes, it's a beginning. It's a first step to what many things have to happen. And so for the 100 Black Men of America, for the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, I also chair the board for the National Business League and with the Black colleges around the country. We're going to get the word circulated. We're going to make sure in our communities that we are talking up and trying to make sure that the members of Congress, those senators and congresspersons who are running, to make sure that this is on their agenda, and we ask the question and encourage them. We have over 125,000 young people in our mentoring program. We're going to educate them with over 56 chapters of our Collegiate 100. This is a great start, but we know it's the people who will make the difference. And just as it had to happen in the movement before, our young people who are in the streets, we cannot condemn them. We can encourage them to have their voices heard. We hope that we do not have the violence, but we know they've been infiltrated. But what we've got to understand, and this nation's got to understand, if we don't address this now, none of us will be able to turn the tide of what is inevitable in this nation. And so with that, with my mayors throughout this country who are members of the 100, we will be working with them to make sure that the masses are prepared. I have 101 chapters of the 100. So my commitment to you is that with all of our organizations and what we're going to do and what the coalition is going to do in terms of education, we're going to do our part to support you because this is right. This is not partisan. This is about saving our nation. And so our voices will be heard. We will make sure we're there. And I, again, want to commend all of you for your leadership. And we will be at the table, and you can count on us throughout our network. So today we will be sharing throughout this country, through our network, to our thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals, encouraging them to be supportive, to call their members of Congress. But we want to commend you and know you can count on us. Senator Booker's there. He's one of our members. Of course, Congressman Clyburn. We have a number of great members, but we want to say to you, you are our congresspersons. I'm fortunate to be in a state where I have 5 congresspeople who are members of the caucus, and I'm doing everything within my power, including my bank account, to make sure they come back after this election. And but for us, we know without the voices of the Congressional Black Caucus, you are our nation's congresspersons, where we have none that we can count on in many communities. And then we know, again, in our close, that those of our color who are not of our kind, and that those of our kind who are not of our color. So with Nancy and those who have joined forces together with all of you, we want to say thank you and know that the 100 Black Men of America, the coalition, the Business League, we're all ready to do our part and to work with our brothers and sisters who are on this call to make sure our voices are heard and we hit from every corner we can to make sure we get this through. And for those in the DA's office and in the elected positions who don't enforce and who don't make a difference, and I hope that you will hold federal funds to any municipality that does not comply, just as we do from USDOT and others. If they don't play right, they don't get paid right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I muted? Let's see.
We hear you, Mark.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Tommy Dortch, the man that wears many leadership hats. And now to Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Derek?
Good. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Melanie, for pulling this together. I want to commend and state our appreciation to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the leadership of Congresswoman Karen Bass, the leadership of Senators Harris and Booker, for pulling this together so quickly. As America, we are standing, using historical analogy, at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It is a choice of whether or not we're going to march across the bridge or we're going to get stopped on the bridge. We all looked with horror at the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a Black man in broad daylight in front of witnesses being murdered, unjustifiably so, because there was no resistance, there was no cause. And for the international viewers across the globe watching, we are now putting America on trial. Are we willing to walk across the bridge to actually address a systemic problem that has plagued our nation for years and do what's right and just, not only for Black America, but for all of this country? Equal protection under the law should be afforded to all citizens. And as NAACP, we stand in full support and in solidarity with the members of Congressional Black Caucus and all well-meaning members of Congress. It is time now for corporate America, for members of the Senate and the House to put your actions where your words of sympathy were last week. We can stand here together and move forward, or we can decide to allow those words to fall on deaf ears because there are no policy actions to follow. This is a great first step. It is a great opportunity for all of us to stand together, and it's a great time for us to show the international community we can all stand together, because for African Americans, we are done dying. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to work with members of the CBC in this extraordinary leadership to move us forward.
Thank you very much, Derek. And now we'll go to Janice Mathis, Executive Director of the National Council of Negro Women. Janice.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity, Mark and Melanie, for always pulling the group together so that we can express the people's will. I think back to when I began my career in North Georgia as a young lawyer in a very rural, isolated community. And I would say to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, I wish we had had the law that you are proposing in this bill, so that when I went to court to challenge officers who engaged in excessive use of force, I would have had more appropriate tools with which to fight. So I want to congratulate you and thank you and assure you that the National Council of Negro Women, our president, Dr. Janetta Cole, along with our board and our 32 affiliated national women's organizations, stand firmly behind you in the effort to educate voters about this legislation so that it may be passed and they can make their will felt to their representatives in Congress. There is much to be commended in this bill. Using the power of the purse to incentivize the behavior that we want and need from police organizations is proven effective, and it will be in this instance. I would like to say to those members of Black Lives Matter who wonder whether the old folk will stand behind you in this effort, I assure you that we will. 80 of our 300 chapters of NCNW, we call them sections, are based on college campuses. 3 or 4 of my colleagues said to me with sheer emotion in their voices how important this issue is to them and to all of us. I would say that some of us will get together, Melanie, and prepare a lay synopsis of the legislation so that you don't have to have any special training to understand what it means and what it will do. I would point out that one of the most important aspects of the bill from my perspective is that there are incentives for best practices. How do you go about evaluating police officers? How can you tell which ones are likely to commit civil rights infractions? And I would submit that at some point, we'll get to the point where we screen candidates before they become officers so that we can determine who's likely. And if someone has a proclivity, we can narrowly tailor a test that they never become officers in the first place. Again, I want to thank Melanie, the members of the CBC, who acted so quickly and responsively with this legislation, and assure you that we will do everything possible to see it through to its ultimate conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janice. Thank you very, very much. And now we have Bishop Leah Daughtry, co-convener of Power Rising.
Good afternoon, my sisters and my brothers, and all of my fellow sojourners in the March for Justice.
Okay, catch him later.
And I want to thank Senators Harris and Booker, Chairwoman Bass, and all the members of the Congressional Black Caucus for bringing us to this pivotal moment. I was 10 years old when I went on my first protest march. And it was us marching, our community marching, following the death of Clifford Glover, who was also 10 years old and killed at the hands of the NYPD. That was my first march, but it wasn't my last. Soon after Clifford Glover was Claude Reese, Randolph Evans, Eleanor Bumper, Arthur Miller, Louis Baez, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, and the list goes on and on and on. George Floyd was not the first, he was simply the most recent. The Black community has been dealing with these issues around police abuse of power for decades. And when we consider that the current policing system has its roots in the 17th and 18th century notions of Black inferiority and criminality, we must recognize that these challenges that we are facing today, we have been facing for centuries. But I am pleased to join with my sisters and my brothers, and really grateful to the Congressional Black Caucus under the leadership of Chairwoman Bass for taking this strong first step toward addressing the systemic issues that are inherent in our current system of policing and law enforcement. And this first step, as Senator Harris has so eloquently stated, in reimagining public safety and what it means to provide public safety to our communities, and reimagine it so that it includes healers and guardians and peacemakers. This is a pivotal moment, and having this first step and hearing and responding to the right and righteous rage coming from our communities and Americans of goodwill across this country, particularly our young people, demanding change and accountability and the closing of loopholes which have allowed police abuse of power to continue without impunity for centuries. I want to particularly thank them for bringing their moral clarity, bringing moral standing to this issue, so that who we are and who we aspire to be as a nation is consistent with how we take care of our people. This is a first step, but as the African proverb says, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This is the first bite of many more to come. And while we work on this, getting this legislation passed, we can continue to press for the reforms and the reimaginings that are still needed to ensure that all of our people, all of America's children are treated equally and are treated fairly under our system of laws, and to ensure that the promise of America becomes the practice of America. Thank you. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Bishop. We appreciate you. Next, we have Sherilyn Ifill, Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Sherilyn.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be brief because many people have spoken, and I think we want to get into the Q&A if there's time. I represent an organization that has been working on issues of police violence against unarmed African Americans since the 1940s. Many of the cases that were decided by the Supreme Court that addressed the issue of use of force were cases litigated by LDF. Since 2015, we've launched a policing reform campaign to work more intensely around this set of issues that have been so long with us and so long unresolved. Many people have talked about the moment that we find ourselves in since George Floyd was killed and since we all saw that video. But I want to remind us that the bill that we are talking about and that these extraordinary co-sponsors and the CBC has worked on is a bill long overdue. I think we sometimes forget that the unrest that we saw in the 1960s, in 1964, in 1965, and in 1960, 60 cities all over this country, including Minneapolis, were incidents that largely rose from encounters between police officers and unarmed African Americans. We remember that Dr. King said that riots are the language of those who are not heard, but we forget why he was saying it. He was talking about the unrest gripping our nation in 1966. And when we think about the civil rights legislation that was passed during the 1960s, we remember the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, passed just a week after the assassination of Martin Luther King. But the one issue that was never the subject of a comprehensive civil rights bill was the issue that set off unrest in 64, in 65, in 66, in 67, and again in 1992 after the verdict in the Rodney King case. And that is this issue of police violence against unarmed African Americans. And so this bill now comes to us and calls to us over the decades for all of those who were in the street, who were engaged around this issue in the 1960s, and who never heard a comprehensive response from the United States Congress. This bill now begins to provide that response. I say begins because we should not delude ourselves that there is going to be any magic panacea for this deep-rooted issue that has gripped our communities. It is going to take work at the national, state, and local level. But this bill provides vital tools, not only at the national level, but also provides tools to state attorney generals and provides tools for civil rights lawyers to be able to bring private rights of action, to be able to use the law, to be able to hold police officers who engage in this conduct accountable. At the end of the day, I've said what made this different for me was that snapshot of this officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, looking at us utterly unconcerned about the fact that he was being videotaped. His belief that nothing would happen to him is backed up by case after case in which law enforcement officers have killed innocent Black people and have not been held accountable. And it is time for us to deal with that flaw in our legal system. This bill is that first step. I'm grateful to the leadership for pulling this bill together in a short period of time. There's more work to be done, but this speaks powerfully into this moment and powerfully into these issues that we have been raising for years. Sometimes we convince ourselves that there's nothing that can be done to change the situation in which we find ourselves. But there are things that can be done. And I'm grateful that these members of the United States Congress have taken it upon themselves to use their power to do what they can do. This doesn't change that we need action at the state level. This doesn't change action that we need action at the local level, that we need mayors and city council members to act on police budgets and on union contracts. But it does mean that these members of Congress are prepared to use their power to do what must be done, to finally, at long last, address this important civil rights issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and I really appreciate your remarks. Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner for remarks.
Yes, Mark and friends, more than ever, African-American people want exactly what all Americans want. The police as guardians and not predators. Prophets, priests, pastors, and ordinary people have prayed down through the years the words of Prophet Amos, but let justice roll down as water and righteousness as an ever-flowing stream. Today, with the Justice and Policing Act, I believe that that water has started flowing. That water of justice, that stream of justice has begun flowing. And Black clergy and lay people around the country are standing at the ready to help this bill move from proposal, a legislative proposal, to a law of the land. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Melanie, remarks before we go to Q&A?
What I wanted to do, thank you everyone. Thank you to Congresswoman Bass, Senator Booker and Harris, and all my colleagues. I think a lot has been said, so all I'm going to do is, as a host, to say ditto. But I would like to, Mark, go into Q&A and ask if the speakers, Senator Booker, I think is still on, and I know CBC staff are on. Karen Street, the Executive Director for the Congressional Black Caucus, is on, and we can go through. Want to try to go through some of the questions. But one of the things that I think is that people want to know what they can do, and what you can do is call your congresspersons, call your U.S. senators, call your members of the House, and find out and tell them that you want them to support this bill. So that is an action that folks can do. They can go to house.gov to find that information out. You can call the switchboard on Capitol Hill, and that number is 202-224-3121. You can take action from wherever you are, because we want this bill passed. We know it's a historic moment that we can actually do something transformational. So what you can do, those who are listening and sending in questions, take action from wherever you are. We know that you start your own petition. I know many of my colleagues, I'm sure, are starting petitions already. And if you are, please speak up to that. But take action now. We are in this historic moment, and they don't come often. They don't come often, and we know that this has been not just decades in the making, but centuries in the making. We know the idea of needing policing reform and changing policing to being something that is beneficial holistically for African Americans in this country is needed now. Mark, so I think we could go right into Q&A. Do you want me to facilitate pulling that up? I have those questions. Tell me how you want me to handle it. Did I lose Mark?
I'm here.
Okay.
Melanie,
So Melanie, I'm sorry I was distracted.
That's okay.
I think Jan hit it right.
Can
you
Tommy,
hear me?
you're it's chopping you up.
Yeah, Mark.
Hi, Mark. This is New York Audio. Can you hear me okay?
Hello, can you hear me? I
I
can.
hear you now.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Yeah, Melanie, why don't you take over from there?
Okay. So I answered one of the questions, but if anyone wants to answer, I'll start right off the top. Folks asking what can they do? Where do they send letters? Send it obviously to your members of Congress, asking them to sign on to the bill. Anyone else want to add to call to action? Senator Booker, if you're on, or any of our Black leaders on the call.
Melanie,
Go ahead. I think that was Tommy George.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Yeah, Melanie. I think we need the congressional work with you and with Janice. We need to get down so that we can have a dialogue to the system. They call the acts. I think that's going to be very critical. They read all of the legislation. We can get that. We will circulate everywhere with a call to action. So that's going to be critical. So we can move immediately.
Okay.
And we're prepared to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think I heard, because it was chopping up, say technology is wonderful when it works, right? But I think I heard you say that National Coalition, NCNW, all of us will push out information for folks to be able to know how to respond. And especially, I think it was Janice that said we would try to make sure we get everything out to folks. Hopefully people, when they got this invitation, receive the summary of what's in the bill. Because the key is to know what's in it so that you know that you do support it, or any kind of things that you see that aren't in it or need to be in the process of this becoming law. Any other colleague want to respond to calls to action?
Melanie, one of the questions I thought was important is, will there be a whistleblower element of this legislation? So there are, good police, morally excellent police who will be protected if they come forward.
Okay, is Senator Booker or anyone else from CBC on to respond to that?
maybe that's something we could follow up with.
Follow
because
up on. Okay.
Yeah, and I can jump in and just say, this is Karen Street, CBC.
Thank you, Karen.
No problem. I can share that there is a basically a duty to intervene. So happy to talk with Ledge Council and Judiciary Council about the whistleblower idea as we move forward. But a part of making sure that we are saving lives on the front end is adding a duty for officers to intervene when they see that another officer is violating the civil rights of individuals.
Thank you. Next question is on a local level, how do we advocate for police reform? I think in some ways we say that if you go to your congressperson's office, right? Because the key is to get this particular federal legislation passed. Also, always you can use this as a backdrop to organize on a local level in your local level up to your state level. That we know that not all of this will fix things on a local level. We know politics is local. Any colleague?
Let me take that, Melanie.
Yes,
Melanie, let me take that.
Thank you.
It's an important question, and it goes to the fact that this federal law will do what it can do to increase accountability, but that essentially police departments are functions of local governments. They're functions of municipalities, or functions of county governments, and that's where decisions on hiring, firing, personnel, many things are made at the mayor and councilmanic level. This is what I'm able to do. Let's focus right now on the importance of our national advocacy by encouraging our members of Congress to support the Justice in Policing Act. And secondarily, let us engage at the local level with other community leaders, with mayors and other elected officials about your local police force. One important resource is the Washington Post has a great database on the killings of people by police. You can actually take a look to see what is the record in your own community. Secondarily, it's important to now introduce the conversation about reimagining and thinking differently about how police departments function in your local community. And it's important at this stage to ask the questions and demand reform at the local level, understanding that this federal law will do what it can do to strengthen accountabilities and push the types of practices we think are essential. But at the end of the day, local government controls, funds, and determines the outcome of local policing. So I think that the first thing people have to do is get a picture of how your local police department functions, get an idea of what their record is when it comes to the killings of unarmed people, conduct that examination. I've recommended to the mayors who called me that they should conduct either audits or operational reviews of their departments in order to get a sense of what the policies are on hiring, firing, discipline, use of force, what the philosophy is about deployment and policing, to get their arms around that so you can reimagine how it can be different. We're going to have to do more work to basically empower local communities around policing and police reform as we go forward. Right now, I want to really encourage people to speak to the moment. The moment is really to get this federal law passed through the Congress. Let's get it through the House, and let's put pressure on Mitch McConnell and his allies in the Senate to act. And don't act in a piecemeal measure. Give us this comprehensive bill. Now is the time to do something substantive, something significant with respect to police reform. So with that, Mel and colleagues, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you. I've got to go to my next meeting.
Okay.
And have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Mustafa Ali asked the question, will grants to communities be focused on local governments or frontline organizations? Karen or Senator, can you answer that?
Yeah, so those are new grants. That is, there's no new money for, it's important to know because there's certainly a movement. There is no new money for law enforcement in this bill unless it is constitutionally required. So in that instance, if you're requiring data collection, it's been held that constitutionally you would have to provide some resources to law enforcement organizations. The community policing grants are focused on providing direct federal funding to community-based organizations so that they can do the work themselves and be empowered in re-envisioning what their policing will look like in their local community.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna, for those who can stay on, we're gonna stay on for about 10 more minutes to answer as many questions, and understanding some colleagues may not be able to stay on, but if folks can hang on for 10 minutes, because you may be able to answer some of these questions. Next question, anonymous attendee. Section 103 proposes sending money in the form of grants to states' attorneys general to conduct pattern and practice investigations. What information do we have to suggest that the reason that this isn't happening is a capacity issue and not sheer lack of political will? Anyone want to respond to that?
I'd like to say a word that might be responsive to that.
Okay.
If you take the case of the Affordable Care Act, it wasn't that states necessarily wanted to expand Medicaid, but with the grant money on the table to help pay for it, it was difficult for them to make a rational case to their voters. And I would say that this is in a similar posture. No, the political will may not be there, but having the grant money available makes citizens and voters ask the question, why not do it? If it's feasible economically, then what is your objection to justice? That puts a hard question to elected officials. And so for that reason, I think it could be affected. No, there's probably enough money to do anything they want to do. But this is a way of leveraging the influence of the federal government to make it more palatable.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Carol Joyner asked a question. Kudos to all of you for taking swift and important action. Will there be a sign-on letter? I think I mentioned that. If anyone has a sign-on letter, I don't know if Derek is still on from the NACP, a sign-on letter that folks can sign on to in support of the bill. In response to that.
Hey, minute, this is Derek. We have not generated a sign-on letter. We can. We're going to ask the members of the press for all of the corporations and individuals who have outpours of support and concern concerning racism as a result of this, to ask those same companies, what are they going to do to support this bill? This is not just a CBC issue or a Black problem. This is a problem for America. This is not a partisan opportunity. This is an opportunity for all of Congress to step up and say, this has been a systemic issue for this country, and this is the start of right-sizing how we police in this nation. Growing up in Detroit, driving 10 minutes across the bridge to Windsor, Canada, you can feel the difference in the culture. Police didn't carry guns, and yet they were able to have a presence where people could appreciate. That is the type of role and culture we should be trying to build. It's not a Black problem. This is a problem of this country. And the onus is on corporate America. The onus is on members of the Senate of both parties. The onus is on members of the House and Senate of both, all communities, to step up and say, this is a way we can go forward. Because if we don't go forward, we're going to go backwards. And in the future, we'll be looking at another incident just like this. Let's stand up. Sign-on sheets is not going to change this. What will change is if people putting their actions in their deeds where their sympathies were last week. We have to move forward, and actions and deeds would resonate much louder than expressions of concerns and sympathy.
Thank you, Derek. Next question, this is to Dr. Barbara Williams-Skinner and maybe Bishop Daughtry on the line. Someone asked a question, Staccato Powell, what concrete role can the Historic Black Church play in this effort during these critical times to create a sustainable initiative for systemic transformation to eradicate the killing of our sons and daughters?
Let me say that, like Bishop Leah Daughtry, pastors are on Facebook Live every Sunday. They're doing Tuesday night or Wednesday night Bible study. We should produce, as Janet Mathis says, a layman's language version of this legislation, that they can share this on their website so people can understand that this is about them. So that's the beginning of what I believe our esteemed Zion brother just asked, and all of the denominations can do. Someone else asked what the Black church can do. The Black church are all over. They're in Republican and Democratic district. Whether the member is Democrat or Republican or independent, they should be reaching out to their member saying they should be a part of this. And send, I put my email on that they could send us a copy for the National African American Clergy Network.
Thank you. This question I think is for Karen Street, if you can answer this question. Combine the question from Michael Kelsey. So what type of cultural diversity training will be implemented for police and cadets? And also, how do you plan does this bill address the no-knock warrant laws?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on the no-knock warrants, it prohibits them. In terms of diversity training, racial bias, cultural sensitivity, all of that is covered under a piece of the bill that is a hallmark, kind of legacy piece of John Conyers, one of our founding CBC members, the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, which establishes an accreditation standard. And all of those training requirements are wrapped up in the accreditation requirements.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Dr. Benjamin Chavis, Junior representing the Black Press of America via the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We support this legislative initiative. We support the CBC and all of our fellow national civil rights and freedom fighting organizations on this call. What can the Black press do to help inform 50 million African Americans about this bill? Definitely get the word out. Anyone else, anyone want to respond to Dr. Chavis?
I think opening up a space, Dr. Chavis, thank you so much for the question. Open up a space for some of the civil rights leaders to have an op-ed or a piece that can go to all the Black press on some consistent basis about this would be very helpful as a starting point.
Thank you.
Great idea.
I'm gonna try to do rapid question, rapid response, so we can finish in the next 5 minutes at the latest. Deanna Brooks, People for the American Way, what's the timeline for the bill moving forward?
So there is a hearing in the Judiciary Committee this Wednesday at 10 a.m. on police accountability. It is our expectation to move swiftly to respond to this moment and have a markup in Judiciary the following week, so next week, and then also move forward to get this bill to the floor as soon as possible. Leader Hoyer in a press conference this morning where we all stood in solidarity in introducing this bill, committed to bring the House back into session as soon as this bill is ready. And we will.
Thank you. Sheena Mead, who is a member of Black Roundtable Black You Vote, she says, thank you for putting this call together. You have the full support of the Clean Slate Initiative, which focuses on criminal justice reform. So thank you, Sheena. Cleo Brown with A. Philip Randolph. APRI is ready for the fight, and they're going to do all they can to mobilize their members. Thank you so much, Cleo Brown. Trying to see. Someone asked the question, were members of the movement for Black Lives Engaged in developing this first step in policing reform leading to imagining a system of public safety? I guess that would be a Karen Street question. Karen, did you hear that question? Did I lose her? I do know that.
I'm not sure, but there's a lot of engagement.
A lot of community
now organizing.
Right, and I know Congresswoman Bass has definitely reached out to many folks out in the community. And I know that you all have a hearing. Don't you all you mentioned the hearings, and that anyone that has feedback still has opportunity to do that, my understanding.
Yes, the hearing is on Wednesday, and then CBC is also hosting its own forum on Thursday at 10 a.m. Okay. And all of that information will be up on our website, cbc.house.gov.
Okay. Jamie Pascal will do 2 more
questions. Melanie, before I sign off.
Go ahead, Tommy. Your Wi-Fi is choppy.
Why don't we? We can do a little bit better. How's that? What I wanted to say. All right.
Go ahead. It's chopping you up. Can you put it in the thing and I can say it for you?
Well, we listen to you what we can amass all of the efforts taking place.
I'm so sorry, Tommy. The
We just need
Wi-Fi is chopping you up so you can't hear. It's every fourth or fifth word, so you can't get the. If you
What
type
about-
in chat, I'll repeat it. If you have a second, or text me, or better
follow
yet,
up with clearing. Follow up later so we can get a
Okay.
clearinghouse.
okay. And if you text me, I'll repeat what you said because it's still chopped up really, really bad on Wi-Fi.
Right.
Okay.
I'll call you later.
Okay.
Clearinghouse.
And apologize for that. We only control this Wi-Fi on. I think we apologize for all the other questions we were not able to get to. We promised that this would be ending at 1:30. It's now 1:46. So I want to thank again Congresswoman Bass and her colleagues, Senators Harris and Senator Booker, and all of those Congressional Black Caucus members who took the lead on moving very swiftly to introduce this bill, and thank all those who have already signed on, and then remind all those who have not signed on that we are paying attention. Black people are paying attention. The time is now to do the right thing. It's centuries in the making. And we know it's not the end all solution, but it is a good beginning to begin to transform policing in this country so that police protect and serve all of the people safely and fairly. So we want to thank you all. Please follow us. Please, Congressional Black Caucus, follow all of our organizations. We will be posting this. We thank, I think Roland Martin Unfiltered, who has it live on his, Congressional Black Caucus has it live on theirs, and we will continue to push out information. And remember, contact your Congress people and ask them and tell them that you want them to lead by supporting Policing Justice Act of 2020. Thank you all and be safe.